So it looks like it's my turn now to review the Dark Mansion Tarot. I do realize that this is one of the favorites of the internet at the moment, so there's a lot of videos of this deck, a lot of reviews, flip-throughs, walkthroughs, unboxings, and the likes. I love this deck. The first time I saw one of its images was, I think, when the creator or the creators were first, when they first started the project, maybe about 2 years ago. I can't quite recall, but I remember it was the Knight of Swords, which reminds me very much of Napoleon, a painting of Napoleon. And I remember thinking, the image is so dynamic. I love dynamic images, a lot of movements, a lot of vibrancy and color, very expressive. The lines are very stark, very clean and crisp and black. And so it kind of suggests a kind of two-dimensionality, and yet it's shaded so that it feels three-dimensional at the same time, and it reminds me very much of puppetry. It's kind of cartoony but three-dimensional, and it's not pretending to represent life as it looks, or life things, or things living or non-living as how they really are, but unapologetically a caricature of it. And yet at the essence of it all, the dynamic of its expression, of its sceneries, of its interactions between the figures and the stories inside the images are what make them alive. It reminds me very much of watching anime, so what some people call Japanese cartoons. They're not quite cartoons, but I remember thinking when I was growing up in the 80s, I was very much a fan of both Disney style and Disney itself. Animations, as well as the Japanese ones, where in the Japanese animation there is less desire to represent the faces as they look like in real life or as they look like in real humans, but more but the spirit of it is very real. For example, if they depict an explosion, a lot of them are science fiction, are the one that I watched, the animes that I watched in the 80s when I was younger. And in this explosion, you'll just see a white page, a white screen with silence, deafening silence. And it's so simple, and yet it put you in a position of the actor, where upon that explosion, you see nothing and you hear nothing. And that was very, very powerful for my young self to experience all that. And I actually get so obsessed by understanding what made these animes so powerful that I bought a book and I read through it, and I still have it, I think, somewhere. I think it's in storage like most of my life. It's written by, I can't quite remember, it's a media study sort of analysis, and it's so fascinating. And one of the things that they discussed was that use of blank screen and silence. Instead of representing faces in the most realistic way with proportions of eyes, nose, and mouth, Japanese animes are known to have oversized eyes, for example, that sort of thing. And this reminds me very much of that. And Jo from Sacred Space Japan had a review of this deck in which she directed our attention to a filmmaker from the early 1900s, whose work reminded her very much of some of the aesthetic here. And so that got me going, and I went on a sort of further research of George Melies. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm not too sure. I don't speak French. And I spent a lot of time researching the movies that he made, his names, and how to pronounce these French names, as well as the Polish names of the creators of this deck. And so, first of all, before I get into that this is by Taroteca, not Taroteca. So there is a company called Taroteca with 2 T's and 1 I. This is 1 T and an E, Taroteca. So Taroteca is a completely different company by a completely different person and producing very, very different decks compared to the kind of decks that these guys are producing. So this was sent to me by Krzysztof Wasiuk, and the illustrator is Magdalena Kaczan. And this particular edition here is sent to me free of charge for the purposes of a review. I have, however, purchased 2 of their other editions. One is this standard edition here, and the other one is the deluxe edition in a wooden box, a really nice pouch, and 2 extra cards. So the differences between this and this is simply the size, the edging, this is black, and the back. Now I am pulling this particular edition out, not so much to compare the two because there's a lot of comparison videos out there, but to show you the back here, which is what triggered Jo's memory of an image from her younger years. That is not to say she's old now, but from yesteryears, of the image of one of George Melies' film. I think that's Melies there, that's the name there. I think this is the name of the film, The Voyage à travers l'impossible. The Impossible Voyage is what the film has been translated in America. In the UK, it was translated to Whirling the Worlds as a title. And so as you can see here, the art is obviously very, very much inspired by Méliès' many whimsical, fantastical movies from the early 1900s, 1902 and 1904. This particular Impossible Voyage is 1904. His other very famous movie is, I think, called Journey to the Moon from 1902. And if I showed you an image of that moon with a big rocket stuck in one of its eyes, you would recognize it immediately. That image is so iconic, almost a cliche, because it's been used many, many times in many, many modern media, a bit like the Mona Lisa. And so the Journey to the Moon was very, very popular, and 2 years later he created this one here, The Impossible Voyage. In part, it was inspired by a play, I think called Journey Through the Impossible by Jules Verne. Spirit of the aesthetic of this deck is very much like what this film critic says or said about The Impossible Voyage. It says, "This film expressed all of Méliès' talents. In it, his feeling for caricature, painting, theatrical invention, and camera science became triumphant. The complexity of his tricks, his resourcefulness with mechanical contrivances, the imaginativeness of the settings, and sumptuous tableau made the film a masterpiece for its day." So the tableau, that sense of sumptuous tableau, that sense of caricature, of theatrical paintings, and this sort of two-dimensional things made three-dimensionals, is very much the feeling that I get from this art in this deck. And I find it quite interesting that with such stark lines in the edges of the illustration, instead of soft colors, made it very obvious that this particular illustration is not trying to be realistic, but at the same time it gives it volume and it gives it shape using these shadings. And I think that's probably what created that feeling of puppetry, that sense of a cartoon but not quite, that we get from Nightmare Before Christmas and Corpse Bride. And so George Melies was the first person to use storyboarding He's also the grandfather of special effects. So you could consider his movies to be of the earliest of that genre. I think Journey to the Moon, and then this one here, The Impossible Voyage, and the other one is The Kingdoms of the Fairies, I think is what he's known for, and I'll put some links down below. The clips are available on YouTube for you to watch. Again, that moon and that sun over there, and this kind of tableau that is quite apparent if you watch the clips of his films. And the layers of the scenes, you could see this is in front of that, and it's in front of that, and it's in front of that. And the three-dimensionality here is created very much. If you look at George Melies, his moon and sun, it explains everything. So that you see this one here, that the way the clouds are like that here, it looks like paper being cut into shapes and layered from front to back in a way that you would see traditional scenes on stage in theaters. This particular aesthetics in movies especially, I almost see it's almost as if I'm watching them move. These images for me, they move. And look at all that. Like this one here, it just so captivating for me. When I saw this online, I knew it was the deck for me. And I'm ever so glad to be reminded of its existence recently when I finally purchased my 2 copies, not this one, but the large edition in a box and the regular edition. Because I had forgotten up to then. And initially I thought, well, maybe I'm just buying this because it's cute. You know, a lot of the times I fell in love with something aesthetically, and although as art pieces or as pop art they work, as a deck of cards telling the stories of tarot, the 78 stories of tarot, it didn't quite work out for me. And this one, on the other hand, have worked really, really well. The storytelling power of these images, and I think I could feel a depth in it, and I wasn't sure what I was feeling there. And when I found out that the artist is clearly inspired by those classics in movie history, those classics, revolutionary milestones in 20th century storytelling art, it's filled with wonder and whimsy, innocence, adventure, and the sense of possibilities, of the optimism of the dawn of the 20th century. You know, before you became quite jaded by the side effects of technology, and when the world was the beginning of wonder, you know, before you realize what kind of payments, what kind of cost those wonders come with, sort of thing. So 2 thumbs up for me, because the artwork, I love it. It has depth. It has the fluidity of the kind of storytelling that is the cream and the cherry on top of the sponge cake that is the Rider-Waite-Smith. And if you like the art, I think, and if you like Rider-Waite-Smith system, I think you'll be in for a great surprise if you don't expect very much from it. Connecting with the aesthetic is a very important first step, although at times when the fluidity of storytelling is more powerful than the aesthetic, and people can connect with the flow of narrative more than they do with the aesthetic, and that can work as well. From my point of view though, I really like the aesthetics, so I can only speak from that position. And I really like that connection, that there is that flow of commonality between the creator and myself that I found in those old movies. So 2 thumbs up for me, and I'll talk to you guys later.